She shouldn't have touched the wrong carriage. Every instinct screamed at her, but curiosity, or maybe desperation, had pushed her forward. The cold night pressed against her skin, icy fog curling around her like it wanted to swallow her whole. Snow and mud clung to her boots as she ran, leaping from carriage to carriage, heart hammering in a rhythm that matched the pounding of hooves somewhere behind her. She could hear them, voices, growls, commands, but she didn't dare turn back. Each shadow seemed alive, whispering warnings she didn't want to hear, and yet her own power flared inside her, silver sparks of strength she couldn't control sparking like lightning in her chest. Confusion, fear, and a smoldering anger collided in her mind. How did she always end up in the wrong place at the wrong time? And then she saw her, the Alpha King's sister, standing frozen near the carriage doors, eyes wide, mouth trembling. "My brother needs a mate," she whispered, and the words cut sharper than any blade. The realization hit her. She had seized the wrong pack carriage. Every muscle in her body tensed as the air thickened with unspoken warnings, the forest and snow alive with a predator's patience. A massive silhouette loomed just beyond the carriage, dark and immovable, yet she felt its gaze like fire on her skin. Panic threatened to tip into fury, her pulse racing as her latent shifter power screamed for release. Yet she knew losing control could mean certain death. She pressed herself against the carriage, breath shallow, mind spinning. Trust? Danger? Desire? She didn't know which emotion would save her, and which would betray her. If you crave forbidden romance and stories that grip your heart, subscribe to Anne's Romance Collections. Hit the bell so you never miss a tale that burns. And just like that, her world tilted. The wrong carriage, the sister's tearful cry, the Alpha waiting somewhere in the shadows. It was a trap. Or was it destiny? Either way, there was no turning back. The moment she pressed her back against the carriage, trying to make herself smaller, a voice cut through the cold night like steel. Low, commanding, impossibly steady. "You shouldn't be here." She froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs. That voice, authoritative, deep, dangerous, made every nerve in her body flare with tension. Slowly, cautiously, she peeked around the corner of the carriage and saw him. The one the sister had warned her about, the brother whose mate she might have just stumbled into. He was impossibly tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of presence that made the air feel heavier. Shadows danced across his sharp features, highlighting the scars that ran like whispered stories over his face and hands. Tales of battles fought, of enemies slain, of pain endured. His eyes, however, were what struck her most. Gold flecked with amber, deep as molten fire, and fixed on her with a curious intensity that made her pulse stutter. "You know my name," she whispered, disbelief threading her voice with fear. "I've been watching," he said, voice softer now, almost hesitant, though every word carried weight. "Not to harm you, but to keep you alive. You're reckless." Her instinct screamed at her to flee, to melt into the fog and snow, to erase herself from his sight before she made a mistake that could cost her life. Yet there was something magnetic about him, a force she couldn't name but couldn't resist. Her body reacted before her mind could, breath catching, pulse thundering, muscles taut. "You shouldn't touch what isn't yours," he said, stepping closer, and the world seemed to shrink. The snow beneath her boots crunched, tiny, insignificant sounds, but loud enough for her to feel exposed. Especially when it belongs to him. His voice softened, almost tender, yet danger lurked beneath every syllable. Her hands trembled. She wanted to push him away to escape, but the warmth radiating from him, the subtle scent of his power, something ancient, dominant, undeniably alpha, rooted her in place. For a moment, fear and attraction collided inside her like opposing storms, and she didn't know which would win. "Then, help me," she said, her voice trembling, though she tried to mask it with defiance. He paused, studying her. There was a flicker of conflict in his gaze, something vulnerable buried beneath his commanding exterior. "I can't, not yet," he said, almost as if confessing a secret, "but I won't let anything happen to you while you're in my sight." Their proximity was unbearable. She could feel the heat of his body, the raw strength coiled like a predator beneath his skin. Her own power stirred in response, tiny sparks of silver flame brushing against her senses, a reminder that she was more than just prey in this game of shadows. The air between them was alive, crackling, a dangerous magnetic pull she couldn't resist. Her chest heaved, breath ragged. One step closer, one accidental brush of fingers, and she would give in to trust, to desire, to the impossible connection flaring between them. Yet she couldn't ignore the danger beyond him. The lurking shadows, the sister's pleading eyes, the truth of her own mistake in boarding the wrong carriage. "Do I?" she asked, voice breaking slightly, the question unfinished. "Trust? Escape? Survival? I don't know if you can," he admitted, gaze never leaving hers. "But I see you. All of you. Even what you try to hide." The weight of his words pressed against her chest, a strange comfort and a terrifying promise at once. Outside, the snow whispered and the fog twisted like fingers reaching for her, reminding her that danger was real, immediate, and closing in. Every instinct screamed that she should flee. Every heartbeat screamed to stay. And then, just as her resolve began to waver, a growl, not his, not hers, echoed through the mist. Something massive, unseen, powerful was moving toward them. Her pulse spiked, her body ready to sprint, yet she couldn't tear her eyes from him. The alpha's gaze sharpened. "I can fight it," he said, voice low, dangerous and yet protective. "But you have to decide. Stay or run." Her mind screamed for escape. Her heart whispered desire. The snow, the fog, the looming silhouette behind them, the world held its breath. And she knew, in that fragile, suspended moment, that either choice could change everything. The air shimmered with unspoken tension, the pull between them like a force of nature. Her pulse, her fear, her power, and the scent of him intertwined, a storm she could neither control nor resist. And in the shadows the truth waited, something far larger than mistakes, far darker than fear, far more intoxicating than desire. Would she run, or would she stay? She pressed herself against the wooden wall of the carriage, breath uneven, hands trembling, not from the cold but from the weight of her own history. Each heartbeat echoed memories she had tried desperately to bury. The rejection, the whispers, the exile that had torn her from the only life she'd known. She remembered the pack elder's cold stares, the words carved into her like claws. "Too dangerous. Too unstable. Not one of us." The echoes of betrayal had followed her across forests and frozen rivers, a constant shadow that refused to fade. Her hands, scarred from years of hiding and surviving, traced the jagged edges of her own wounds. Blood, her blood, mingled with snow, and the sight ignited something inside her, a spark she didn't dare name. The silver flame, flickering at the edges of her senses, whispered promises she had long denied. She was more than just a hunted omega. She was something else, something powerful, something forbidden. The alpha's presence was a tether to reality, grounding and frightening all at once. He knelt a careful distance away, his shadow stretching across the snow-dusted ground like a promise and a warning. His hands moved with deliberate precision, wrapping a rough cloth around a gash on her arm, the warmth of his touch sending jolts through her nerves. Every glance, every careful motion, spoke volumes without words. He saw her. All of her. Her instincts screamed at her to pull away, to vanish into the night, but the ache for connection, long denied, long feared, kept her rooted. She hadn't allowed anyone this close in years, and yet here he was, unwavering, patient, not asking for anything but giving something she hadn't realized she craved: safety. "Why do you care?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, laden with vulnerability and disbelief. "I'm not meant to be saved." He looked up from tending her wound, eyes softening, and for the first time, the alpha's usual commanding aura gave way to something profoundly human. "You don't get to decide that for yourself," he said, voice low, measured. "Not anymore. Not while I'm here." She swallowed hard, fighting back the sting of tears, the memories of being cast out. Faces from her past flashed in her mind. The pack that had branded her a threat, the friends who had turned away when fear outweighed loyalty. They had called her dangerous, but danger had never been the truth. Survival, yes. Power, yes. And now, the possibility of belonging. Her gaze flicked to him again, and she saw more than a savior. She saw someone who bore his own scars, someone who understood, though perhaps only in part, the weight of being feared for what one truly was. The alpha's chest rose and fell with calm, deliberate breaths, and in that rhythm she felt a strange, fragile hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could trust again. The snow around them whispered and shifted, curling through the gaps of the carriage, reminding her that danger had not passed. Shadowy forms lurked in the periphery, unseen yet sensed, every instinct of her shifter self bristling. The fire in her veins stirred in response, teasing, calling, insisting. She flexed her fingers, felt the shimmer of silver at her skin's edge, the latent power that had once terrified even herself. She hadn't yet learned to control it, but she could feel its pulse, like a heartbeat entwined with her own. "You're more than your past," the Alpha murmured, voice barely audible over the crunch of snow and distant echoes of the forest. "And you're stronger than you realize. I've watched. I know." She wanted to scoff, to mask the tremor in her voice with defiance. Instead, words lodged somewhere in her throat. She wanted to believe him, wanted to allow herself to feel for the first time in years that maybe she wasn't alone in the world. That maybe someone could see her and not flinch from the fire she carried. Minutes or hours passed like that, time suspended in a delicate balance of fear, desire, and the unspoken recognition that their fates had intertwined far beyond chance. He finished wrapping the wound, his hands lingering an instant too long on hers. She didn't pull away. Not immediately. That small act, so simple yet monumental, spoke to the thawing of barriers long built, to trust beginning to weave itself cautiously between them. Outside, the forest remained silent but alive. The fog shifted, shadows danced between trees, and every instinct screamed danger. She could flee and hide, disappear as she had done countless times before. But for the first time her hesitation was not solely from fear. The pull toward him, the need for connection, for understanding, was almost stronger than the instinct to survive alone. The Alpha stepped back, surveying her cautiously, eyes never leaving hers. "Rest for now," he said, voice a mixture of command and care. "But stay ready. They'll come. And you'll need to be ready too." Her pulse throbbed, a mix of adrenaline, fear, and something deeper, unnameable. She nodded, uncertain, yet for the first time not wanting to vanish entirely. A quiet hope kindled in her chest, fragile as a candle flame in the wind. Maybe, just maybe, she could let someone in. Maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't entirely against her. And beneath it all, that small spark, the silver flame, stirred, brushing against her senses like a whisper of destiny, promising that her story had only just begun. The forest opened before them like a secret held for centuries, its ancient trees towering with twisted, gnarled limbs that seemed to whisper secrets older than time. Mist coiled around the roots like tendrils of memory, curling up to brush the heroine's ankles as she walked. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighed down not by snow or mud, but by the sense of inevitability pressing against her chest. The further they ventured, the more she felt it, an invisible pull, a thread tugging at her very soul. The Alpha stayed close, his presence both anchor and warning, but even he could not shield her from what waited at the heart of the grove. Ahead, a clearing revealed a stone altar, overgrown with moss, etched with symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the dappled sunlight. The carvings pulsed as if alive, reacting to her very presence. She stepped forward, hesitant, fingertips hovering over the cold stone, and images flashed behind her eyes. Visions of fire, of wolves circling, of eyes gleaming in shadow. "Child of the flame. One with the mark." The words echoed in her mind, reverberating like distant thunder, and her heart thudded violently against her ribs. "Do you feel it?" the Alpha asked softly, almost reverently, standing a careful distance away. His voice was low, tinged with awe, and with something else she couldn't quite place, a trace of fear. He had seen her power before, but not like this. Not when the very air seemed to bend, whispering her name and calling her to something greater than herself. She swallowed, trying to steady herself. I don't know what this is," she admitted, voice trembling. "I feel something. But it's like a fire I can't control, like it's reaching for me." Her hands shook as she brushed against the carvings, silver light flickering beneath her skin, the forbidden flame she had long hidden now flaring against her will. The Alpha's gaze never left her. His jaw tightened as he stepped closer, careful not to touch, yet unable to resist the pull. "You're meant for more than survival," he murmured. "Whatever this power, this mark, it's not a curse. It's a calling. And the world, the pack, they've underestimated you for far too long." Doubt surged, intertwining with the thrill of recognition. Could she be destined for something beyond fleeing and hiding? Could the whispers of her bloodline, long feared and shunned, truly mean she was meant for greatness? Her chest tightened, caught between fear and longing, between the safety of running and the pull of a destiny she could hardly comprehend. The carvings beneath her fingers seemed to respond, glowing brighter as if acknowledging her hesitation and amplifying the pulse of her heartbeat. She felt ancestral energy thrumming through the earth, through her veins, through the silver flame that refused to be tamed. Images danced before her eyes, a pack united under fire, a throne of stone, wolves bowing, a world trembling with power she might wield. The visions were intoxicating and terrifying all at once, and she stumbled back, pressing against the rough bark of a tree, inhaling raggedly. "Don't fight it," the Alpha warned, his voice low but firm, carrying both command and care. "I've seen what they call dangerous, what they fear. I've watched you rise from it. You're more than the sum of their doubts." He paused, his gaze scanning the grove, noting every flicker of silver along her skin, every shiver that wasn't from the cold. "And if you accept this, you'll need to trust me. Trust that I will not let them take what's yours." Her stomach churned at the thought. To accept her power meant to step fully into a world that had already rejected her, a world that might destroy her for it. But the pull, the undeniable tug at her heart and soul, whispered insistently that she was ready, or would be soon. She swallowed hard, closing her eyes for a heartbeat, and let the visions wash over her. Through the haze of magic and the fluttering pulse of the silver flame, she sensed him moving closer, the Alpha King whose presence had become as essential as air. His gaze met hers again, unwavering, and she saw respect, awe, and something far deeper. A recognition of the fire they both carried. The fire of survival, the fire of legacy, the fire that could consume or illuminate. The wind shifted, carrying with it scents of ancient earth, cold stone, and faint traces of wolf fur. A ripple moved across the ground, and the carvings flared again, as though the forest itself exhaled in acknowledgement. She could feel it in her bones. The prophecy was not idle words from long-dead lips. It had chosen her. It demanded something from her. And if she faltered, if she rejected it, the cost could be unimaginable. For a long moment they stood in silence, two figures in a grove thick with power and possibility. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as if aware of the delicate balance teetering between fear and acceptance, between running and claiming what she had been born to wield. Finally the Alpha spoke again, his voice a whisper that carried like thunder through the grove. "Whatever comes next, you're not alone. I'll stand with you. But you must decide, will you let this define you, or will you let fear chain you to the past?" Her eyes flicked to the carvings once more, the pulse of silver flame echoing the rhythm of her heart. She didn't answer yet. She wasn't sure she could. But somewhere deep inside something stirred. An ember of hope, of courage, of destiny that refused to be denied. She realized with a shock that left her breathless, that this journey, this power, this fire, it wasn't just hers to hide. It was hers to embrace. And in that instant, the forest seemed to hum in agreement, the mist curling like fingers reaching toward her, the altar glowing like the heart of the world itself, recognizing a truth that even she had yet to fully accept. The Alpha's eyes softened, but his vigilance never wavered. He sensed the pull, the danger, and the promise of what she could become. And though fear lingered even in him, he could not hide the spark of awe, the knowledge that the girl before him, trembling yet defiant, was on the verge of something legendary. She inhaled, her chest rising with the weight of a destiny she could no longer deny. The prophecy had chosen her, the mark was hers to bear, and the path forward, whatever it demanded, whatever it cost, she was ready, or she would make herself ready. The grove held its silence, watching, waiting. And in that silence, the first flicker of transformation began to glow across her skin, subtle but undeniable, as if the earth itself whispered, "You are the one. You are the flame." The grove, once sacred and still, erupted into chaos in an instant. Shadows moved at impossible speeds, twisting between trees, between rocks, between the mist that had moments before felt like a protective shroud. The heroine froze for barely a heartbeat before the world shattered around her, shouts, guttural snarls, the sharp clash of claws against stone. Rival alphas had arrived, their presence radiating authority and menace, their followers' eyes wide with fear, loyalty torn between old rules and instinctive awe. She stumbled back, every nerve screaming as she realized the danger was far closer than she had imagined. The forest floor trembled beneath her feet, and the mist thickened into almost a living thing, curling around her limbs, brushing her skin like warning fingers. Her pulse raced. She could feel her power stirring, the silver flame beneath her skin reacting to the threat, sparking in small, uncontrollable flashes. It was as though her body itself was preparing for battle, but her mind screamed at her to run, to hide, to escape. Step away from her. The Alpha King's voice cut through the rising panic, deep and commanding, vibrating through the clearing. His tone carried authority but also desperation, a warning and a plea tangled into one. He surged forward, body taut, eyes scanning every shadow, every flicker of movement, knowing full well the stakes. The girl at his side, the prophecy whispered in stone, the fragile trust that had just begun to bloom. Accusations flew like arrows. "She's not one of us," one pack member barked, teeth bared. "That girl's power will destroy everything we've built." The words pierced her like blades, each syllable inflaming the shame and doubt she had carried for years. She felt the weight of their mistrust pressing down, suffocating, and even as the Alpha moved to defend her, others advanced, claws gleaming in the dim light, eyes reflecting fear and hatred. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat, hear the silver flame in her veins hissing like a living thing. The instinct to flee surged stronger, primal and urgent. Her legs carried her forward, stumbling through roots and moss, but every step felt like breaking a tether. She glanced back. He was there, the Alpha, his figure a solid wall between her and annihilation. But the pack's dissenters didn't waver. They pressed closer, their voices like daggers, and she realized the Alpha was being warned too. Loyalty versus instinct. Duty versus heart. And in that tension, a quiet pang of fear settled in her chest. What if choosing her meant losing everything else? A shadow streaked across the grove. Her skin prickled, hairs rising as the silver flame within her reacted to the danger. She barely had time to register it before claws struck near her feet, tearing the earth and sending a spurt of mud into the air. Panic surged, adrenaline flooding her veins, and for the first time she allowed herself to glimpse the raw edge of her power. Sparks of silver ignited along her limbs, tiny flares that left scorch marks on the bark, warning lights she could barely control. Her own breath came in ragged gasps, fear and exhilaration interwoven as she realized, if she stayed she might destroy as much as she defended. "Leave her," the Alpha roared, fury and warning blending seamlessly. He met eyes with one of the dissenting leaders, the unspoken choice pressing down. Choose the girl, risk the pack, or obey tradition and lose her forever. The tension hung like a storm cloud ready to break, and the heroine saw in his gaze a flicker of desperation she hadn't seen before. She didn't wait for a choice to be made. Instinct seized her and she ran, moving through the forest like a shadow herself. Each step, each leap over roots and icy puddles, was powered by a mix of terror and the awakening force within her. Glimpses of silver flared along her skin with every heartbeat, bright, uncontrolled, warning and weapon in equal measure. She could feel the forest responding to her, mist parting, leaves shivering, the earth itself trembling as if acknowledging the force she was beginning to command. Behind her, the sounds of the pack dissolved into chaos. Shouts, growls, the stamp of claws, the tearing of foliage. The Alpha's voice broke through the clamor intermittently, calling her name, a tether thrown across the storm of fear and fury. Yet she did not stop, could not stop. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion and dread. She wanted to trust him, wanted to turn and allow the protection she had begun to crave, but the betrayal of the pack's doubt and the fire flaring within her made hesitation impossible. Her chest heaved as she darted past the ancient altar, past the sacred grove where destiny had whispered her name only moments ago. The visions from earlier, tiled of flame, one with the mark, blended with the present terror, forming a dissonant harmony of power and uncertainty. Could she wield this force? Could she survive the night? Each answer seemed both yes and no, a paradox gnawing at her mind. And then above the din she heard it, the cry of wolves in the distance, long, mournful, urgent. Not the friendly tones of allies, but a harbinger, echoing across the trees, warning of more approaching. Her silver flame flared brighter in response, small sparks leaping off her skin into the mist, as if the very forest was acknowledging the coming storm. The sound hammered against her chest, mingling with the thundering of her own pulse. The world had shifted. The moment of calm, of discovery, of tentative trust was gone. She skidded to a halt near a tangle of roots, chest heaving, breath freezing in the cold air. Shadows moved at the edge of her vision, ambiguous and threatening, and she realized the alpha's stand alone would not hold them all back. Her fingers brushed against the bark, silver sparks dancing in response to the pressure building within her. His power. I can't control it yet, but I can't let them take me. Her eyes flicked back toward the clearing. The Alpha King was there, body a living barricade, eyes scanning, calculating, heart racing in ways he wouldn't admit. He had chosen her, and now his loyalty was tested against the fury of a pack that feared the very prophecy they had all whispered in secret. But she couldn't linger. Every second spent stationary invited danger, betrayal, destruction. With a desperate inhale, she plunged forward into the unknown, the forest closing around her in a maze of snow, roots, and mist. Every instinct screamed at her to flee. Every ounce of power whispered that running was only the beginning. The distant cries of wolves echoed, a reminder that the night was far from over, that the world was far larger and far more dangerous than she had imagined. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear, beneath the rush of silver fire along her skin, a spark of determination ignited. She would survive. She would rise. She would learn to wield this power. And she would return, stronger, sharper, unafraid. But for now all she could do was run. The cries continued, haunting and ominous, as if announcing that the storm had only just begun, and that nothing, not even the Alpha King himself, could predict what was coming next. The world outside the barn was chaos incarnate, the forest alive with distant snarls, shifting shadows, and the echo of hooves striking frozen earth. But inside there was a fragile, suspended calm. Smoke from the small fire coiled upward in soft spirals, twisting in the cool night air like silent whispers, and the heroine could feel the warmth seeping into her chilled skin, even as adrenaline still clung to her muscles in sharp tremors. Her chest rose and fell in uneven rhythms, and the glow from the fire caught the silver in her hair, scattering it into sparks that reflected her inner turbulence. Fear, exhaustion, and a simmering power she was only beginning to understand. He was there, sitting opposite her, broad shoulders slumped in a rare vulnerability that she had never imagined he would allow anyone to witness. The Alpha King, the untouchable, untamed, dangerous Alpha King, was human here in this quiet, intimate moment. His eyes, usually guarded and commanding, softened as he observed her, tracing the cuts along her forearms, the bruises blossoming like dark flowers on pale skin. Each mark told a story of survival, of fleeing, of fire barely restrained, and he reached out, not forceful, not demanding, but with a hesitant gentleness that made her pulse stutter. "I shouldn't have let them corner you like that," he said quietly, voice low and roughened with restrained emotion. I failed to protect you." There was a tremor in his tone, a chink in the armor that she had always believed unbreakable. His hands hovered just above hers, warmth radiating through the air, yet he didn't close the distance. He gave her space, silently asking for permission, a subtle test of trust. She swallowed, heart thundering. The question that had been forming in her mind, the one she had barely dared to voice, escaped in a whisper fragile as the mist curling outside the barn. "Can I trust you?" The words trembled, layered with everything she had endured. The betrayal of her old pack, the fear that her power was uncontrollable, the sting of isolation. He leaned forward slightly, the firelight tracing the sharp angles of his face, illuminating the scars that told of battles survived and losses endured. "I see all of you," he said finally, voice steady, unwavering but not without warmth. "Every fear, every scar, every flame that burns inside you. I see it. I see you." The words washed over her like a wave she had almost forgotten existed. The comfort, the recognition, the rare sensation of being truly seen. She felt a tremor of vulnerability and connection, a dangerous, intoxicating mix. Her own hand twitched toward his, hesitating in the tension of unspoken permission, and for a heartbeat fingertips hovered just above each other. The nearness of him, the subtle brush of air between them, made her pulse spike. She felt every muscle tense and release, every instinct screaming both caution and desire. Outside, a branch snapped under a wandering animal and she flinched, only to feel the alpha shift slightly, protective primal instincts awakening even in the intimate calm. His gaze flicked toward the noise, sharp and alert, before returning to her, steady and grounding. "No one will touch you," he murmured, more a promise than a warning, yet the words carried a weight that pressed against her chest. Hours seemed to compress and stretch, the fire's glow pulsing like the beating of hearts in synchrony. She spoke then, carefully, cautiously, revealing the edges of her fear, the secrets she had carried since exile, powers she had barely controlled, visions that had haunted her, the quiet terror that her existence might bring ruin. Each confession was a thread pulled from her soul, laid bare in the small space between them, and he listened without interruption, without judgment. His hand moved just slightly, fingertips brushing hers, a contact so fleeting it was almost imagined, yet it left sparks, a resonance, a tremor that traveled deeper than the skin. He spoke next, quietly, almost vulnerable. "I've carried my own scars," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. The admission, simple yet earth-shattering in its intimacy, made her eyes widen. The Alpha King, feared, revered, dangerous, was not infallible. He had his own shadows, his own battles, his own moments of doubt. And in that revelation she felt the magnetic pull of empathy tighten, entwining with the thread of desire she hadn't fully acknowledged. The fire crackled, and for a moment time seemed to hold its breath. They leaned closer, drawn together by the shared vulnerabilities, the flickering warmth, the unspoken connection that neither had expected to find in a world so cruel and unforgiving. Their breaths mingled, subtle heat brushing against the cold night air, hearts thumping in rhythms that almost synchronized. Fingers grazed, tentative, a shiver of awareness darting through her, a question suspended in the charged air. How far could trust go when the stakes were life itself? Yet the calm was fragile. A subtle shift in the shadows caught his attention, and his body stiffened, eyes narrowing, ears twitching with the acute awareness of a predator. His protective instincts surged even as he tried to maintain the intimate distance between them. She felt the tension coil around him, a ripple that echoed in her own body, stirring the flame that she had barely begun to master. "Something's coming," he said quietly, voice tight, cautious. "I can feel it, we're not safe yet." Her chest constricted, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she allowed the closeness, the intimacy, the moment of shared vulnerability, to anchor her fear. Even as the unknown threat approached, even as the world outside loomed with peril, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't dared to hope for. That she could survive, that she could fight, that she could trust someone with her whole being, if only for a moment. The Alpha's gaze met hers, unwavering, steady. His hand reached out again, brushing hers deliberately this time, a subtle promise of protection, connection, and more. The near kiss hung in the air, unconsummated but powerful, a tension so thick it was almost a physical presence. Her breath caught, the firelight reflected in her wide eyes, and she felt the warmth of him, the solidity of him, even as every instinct screamed alert, for danger was never far behind. And then, faint but unmistakable, the sound came. A rustle, distant yet deliberate, a sign that the night was not done testing them, that the forest was alive with forces both seen and unseen, forces that would not allow this fragile connection to exist unchecked. The Alpha shifted, alert, protective, his hand still brushing hers, fingers now intertwined for a heartbeat longer than safety would allow. "Stay with me," he said softly, almost a plea. "I'll protect you, if you let me." She exhaled, uncertainty and longing mingling, the ember of trust igniting, tentative, fragile, yet undeniably present. I will try," she whispered, and in that simple confession, the first threads of something profound, intimate, and unshakable were woven into the storm-tossed tapestry of their lives. Outside, the shadows lengthened, the forest murmured with unseen danger, but inside the barn, firelight and whispered admissions created a fragile sanctuary, a heartbeat of connection, a moment of human and shifter intimacy amidst a world teetering on chaos. The heroine felt her own power stir, her confidence rising alongside the growing warmth between them, and even as the night promised trials, betrayals, and battles yet to come, she allowed herself this. To trust, to feel, to hope, and to stand at the precipice of something she had never imagined possible. And somewhere deep in the forest, unseen eyes watched, and the night held its breath, knowing that this fragile bond, this trust forged in vulnerability, would either be their salvation or their undoing. The fragile sanctuary of the barn, the warmth of firelight, the tentative trust that had begun to root itself between them, it shattered in a single ruthless instant. The heroine's sharp inhalation barely had time to escape before a voice rang out from the shadows, cold, accusing, full of venom and triumph. "There she is," a member of the rival faction hissed. "The one they've hidden from us. The child of forbidden power. The mark of destruction." Her heart stuttered. The name she had tried to bury, the lineage she had tried to forget, the very essence of her being, every secret, every vulnerability, had been dragged into the merciless light. The warmth of the fire felt suddenly distant, almost cruel, and the barn, once a shelter, became a cage surrounded by judgmental eyes and whispered malice. Faces she had thought neutral twisted into fear and suspicion. Some sneered, some gasped in horror, and the weight of collective betrayal pressed down like a physical force. The Alpha King's gaze shot toward her, shock and disbelief mingling with rage and confusion. He stepped forward, protective instinct flaring, but the council's accusation cut him off, their voices rising in unison. "You cannot defend her. Her power will destroy us all. She is not to be trusted." Their words were arrows aimed at his heart, the room vibrating with the authority and fear of those who had decided her fate before she had even breathed. She could barely process it, the swirling storm of anger, hurt, and disbelief knotting her stomach. The power that had simmered beneath her skin, the silver flame that she had barely managed to contain, began to flare unbidden. Her hands trembled, the firelight dancing across the edges of her skin as a shimmer of ethereal energy pulsed outward, almost instinctively like a heartbeat of rebellion. "No," she whispered through gritted teeth. "I am not your weapon, I am not your fear, I am not." Her words broke and a surge of energy rippled across the room, forcing the council to stagger back, eyes wide with fear. The Alpha King's expression was a tempest of conflict. His loyalty to his pack, his respect for tradition, wrestled violently with the magnetic pull of the woman before him. The one he had begun to trust, to care for, to feel something he had never allowed himself to acknowledge. His jaw tightened, and yet his hand reached out to her, steady, grounding, though he did not fully close the space between them. "You don't understand, she is not the danger," he said, voice low, but the room erupted in protest, drowning him in chaos. Her vision blurred with unshed tears, the betrayal slicing sharper than any blade. Friends, or those she had dared to think allies, now pointed fingers, whispered curses, and the sense of isolation that had haunted her for years surged back with cruel force. Her silver flame surged again, a flickering halo of power, more vivid than before, threatening to leap beyond control. The sensation was intoxicating and terrifying, a reminder of all the strength that others feared, all the secrets she had been forced to hide, all the truths she could no longer contain. "You cannot cage me," she shouted, voice echoing with a mixture of fury and sorrow. The air around her shivered as though responding to her unleashed energy, and even the Alpha's steady presence could not fully temper it. Her heart ached, not from the danger outside, but from the realization that she had been betrayed by the very people who should have protected her. The fury in her chest burned brighter than the silver flame that licked at her skin. She fled then instinctively, propelled by a cocktail of grief, fear, and raw power. Each step sent echoes through the barn, each breath a mixture of sobs and controlled anger. As she ran, glimpses of her burgeoning strength shimmered along her form, a silver aura that was both beautiful and frightening, illuminating the path through darkness. Roots twisted underfoot, and she barely noticed, driven by the need to escape, to survive, to reclaim control over the life that had been torn from her by treachery. Behind her, the Alpha King's roar split the night, a sound of frustration, anguish, and a promise that he would follow, that he would not abandon her, even as every law, every loyalty, and every expectation of the pack pulled at him. His eyes burned with the ache of impossible choice, to stand with tradition or stand with her, the woman whose very existence defied the rules but had carved a place in his heart nonetheless. The council's cries, the pack's accusations, faded into the distance, replaced by the primal pulse of the forest at night. Shadows lengthened, coiling like serpents in the periphery of her vision, and she sensed the presence of enemies converging, drawn to her power like moths to flame. Her pulse quickened not only with fear, but with the raw, unrestrained exhilaration of fully inhabiting her strength for the first time. She could feel it, a heady combination of control and chaos, hope and fury, desperation and defiance. The betrayal had fractured her trust, burned away the illusions of safety, But in that crucible of pain she discovered something she had almost forgotten: herself. She was more than their fear, more than their prophecy, more than the whispered warnings. She was fire. She was strength. And for the first time she let it show, even as she ran into the unknown. From the shadows, distant howls echoed, low and menacing, the sound of forces mobilizing, surrounding, converging. Every step carried the weight of her own survival, every heartbeat a drum of defiance. She did not know where she would find safety, she did not know if the Alpha would reach her in time, and she did not know if she could control the power that now surged through her veins. But she knew one thing: she would not be bound, she would not be silenced, and she would not be the pawn of fear that they wanted her to be. And somewhere behind her, through the swirling fog and forest shadows, the Alpha King's voice rang out again, raw, unwavering, a tether to the only hope she had left. "I am not letting you go." The words were both promise and warning, and even as her silhouette slipped through darkness, the knowledge that he was coming, that he was choosing her, ignited a fragile ember of hope amid the searing pain of betrayal. The night was alive with tension, power, and the unrelenting push of destiny. Enemies closed in. Shadows danced closer. And in the midst of it all she ran, burning with the first true taste of her unleashed strength, leaving the broken remnants of trust behind, but carrying with her the spark that could either save her or consume everything around her. The forest held its breath, the wind whispered threats, and the distant howl of wolves, some ally, some predator, carried an ominous promise. This was only the beginning, and the consequences of the betrayal were far from over. The wind howled across the jagged cliffs surrounding the ritual site, carrying a bitter chill that pricked at her exposed skin, but she felt only the roar of the power within her veins. Every step she took across the frozen ground pulsed with intention, her boots leaving scorch-like imprints in the snow, each one a declaration. She would not be a pawn, she would not kneel, she would not fear. Her silver flame danced along her arms, licking the edges of her cloak, illuminating the icy ruins around her in a light that seemed almost alive, as if the ancestors themselves had risen to witness this moment. The Alpha King was beside her now, moving with precise, lethal grace, his presence steady and unwavering, a mirror to her own fury. His eyes, sharp and unwavering, flicked from her to the looming shadows that had gathered at the far edge of the circle. There, the villain who had orchestrated her humiliation, the one who had tried to bind her with fear and whispers, stood tall, cocky, arrogant, underestimating the storm about to descend upon him. "Enough," she said, her voice carrying like a bell through the ruins, ringing clear and cold. Every word was a command, every syllable a spark igniting the air. Her hands rose, palms outward, and the silver flame leapt higher, bending toward her will. From the ground beneath, a tremor responded, subtle at first, then a violent shudder that split loose stones and rattled the bones of the forest surrounding them. The ancestral spirits whispered from the corners of vision, glowing wraiths of wolf and flame, circling the ritual stones as if recognizing the one they had long awaited. The Alpha King moved closer, a shadow of strength at her side. He did not need words. His presence was an affirmation, a tether to the human heart within her, a reminder that she was not alone. Together they were a tempest. Together they were fire and steel, flesh and spirit, defiance made tangible. The villain faltered, eyes widening as the silver light expanded, as though the very earth had risen to heed her call. The heroine's chest heaved, every breath drawn with the weight of centuries of oppression, betrayal, and fear. But now that same breath was a weapon, a challenge, a promise. She would not be sacrificed. She raised her gaze, locking eyes with the one who had sought to control her, and in that glance, there was no hesitation, no fear, only the full embodiment of the power that had simmered in the shadows of her soul. From the far edges, minions and shadow beasts hesitated. The air vibrated with energy, humming with the resonance of her ancestral bloodline, the forbidden shift coursing through her muscles, the silver flame weaving around her like a crown of fire. Each heartbeat was a drum, each pulse a wave that reached into the very bones of the ritual site, shaking loose the cobwebs of corruption and fear that had long clung to the stones. The Alpha King's voice cut through the charged air, steady, commanding. "Stand with me or step aside. She is not alone." And in that moment the world seemed to bend around them. Her hand brushed his, accidental yet electric, and they moved in perfect rhythm, predator and protector, fire and shadow, ready to claim what was theirs by right of strength and spirit. The villain raised a hand, chanting incantations meant to bind and diminish, but each word was met with resistance, repelled by the force of her will. She responded with a voice that was no longer just hers, but layered with the echoes of generations past, the howl of wolves long dead yet alive in memory, the pulse of ancestral bloodline that demanded recognition. The ground erupted in a shockwave, snow and debris scattering like shards of crystal into the stormlit air. Her silver flame surged, now a roaring tide reaching skyward, illuminating the night in searing white brilliance. The villain staggered, shielding his eyes, and she saw fear there for the first time. Not the timid hesitation of a momentary threat. This was pure, visceral terror at the realization that power, true power, could no longer be denied, could no longer be chained, could no longer be bent to the will of those who had long coveted dominion over her life. The Alpha King moved in concert, his own latent feral strength manifesting, claws flashing, senses heightened, every muscle poised to strike in protective synchrony. He was no longer merely observing, no longer merely a guide. He was a partner, a force intertwined with hers, their bond forged in trial, betrayal, and the shared fire of survival. Together they faced the villain, their combined presence a declaration. The wronged would rise, and those who had sought to subdue them would fall. The air shimmered with tension, charged with the electric hum of unleashed magic and predatory instinct. Every exhale she drew ignited the air around her. Every step shifted the earth beneath their feet, and the forest itself seemed to lean in, drawn by the undeniable force radiating from the pair. Snow whipped around them, carried by an unnatural wind, circling like a vortex of silver and shadow, reflecting the fire in her eyes and the unwavering resolve in his. And then the villain moved, desperate, reckless, striking with all the fury of one who had underestimated what lay hidden beneath a quiet exterior. But she met every assault with fluid grace, a dance of light and shadow, power and instinct, her silver flame cutting through the darkness like a blade forged in the hearts of ancestors. The Alpha King mirrored her movements, protective, synchronized, a living shield and sword, his every action amplifying hers, his confidence bolstering her own surging power. Time itself seemed to stretch, the night a stage for a duel not just of strength but of destiny. And yet, amid the chaos and the cacophony of unleashed energy, she felt it, the heartbeat of connection, the thread that tied her to the Alpha, the tether of trust that had survived betrayal and fear. It was a reminder that she was not alone, that even in the midst of overwhelming odds, she could be both fierce and vulnerable, powerful and human. The villain faltered again, stumbling back as the combined force of her silver flame and his unyielding feral might pressed forward. The world seemed to tilt, the earth itself trembling beneath the weight of unleashed legacy, and for a heartbeat, the ritual site was a cathedral of light and shadow, of fire and fury, of destiny claimed and enemies undone. Her lips parted, a breathless declaration, "I am not your sacrifice. I am the storm. I am the fire. And I choose my own path." The silver flame surged higher, ancestral voices crying out in triumph, the forest itself responding, the winds carrying their combined roar to the farthest corners of the night. The villain's confidence crumbled, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream, as they realized too late that she had claimed what was always hers, not by submission, not by mercy, but by embracing the fullness of her power, her identity, and her destiny. Even as the first flares of victory lit the night, she knew this was far from over. The standoff had ended, but the battle for acceptance, trust, and the world she was born to lead had only begun. And by her side, the Alpha King remained unwavering, their partnership now cemented in fire, trust, and unspoken devotion. Together they were unstoppable. Together they had claimed the night. The ritual site trembled one last time, a warning and a promise. The silver flame pulsed, brighter, fiercer, as if heralding the challenges yet to come. And in that moment she was no longer the hunted, the exiled, the betrayed. She was the fire, the power, the legacy. She was unstoppable. The forest had fallen into an uneasy silence, the wind carrying only the faint echo of the battle just fought. The silver flame surrounding her dimmed slightly, flickering like a heartbeat, casting shadows across the jagged ruins of the ritual site. She stood there, chest heaving, her eyes scanning the darkness for threats that might never come, but her instincts, honed by exile and betrayal, would not allow complacency. Each breath was a mixture of triumph and exhaustion, every heartbeat a reminder of the sacrifices she had endured to claim the power that was always hers. Beside her, the Alpha King remained silent, his gaze fixed on the horizon where darkness still lingered, waiting, calculating. Yet even in the aftermath of chaos, his presence was a tether, a grounding force. He had fought alongside her, defended her, mirrored her fire, and yet he too seemed to hesitate, caught in the weight of choices yet to be made. Would he trust her fully, or allow the past and pack politics to shadow the truth they had forged together? That question, unspoken but palpably heavy, hovered between them, and the tension was nearly suffocating. The heroine's mind raced, images of betrayal and judgment flashing against the backdrop of victory. Faces of those who had turned against her, the whispers of the council, the accusations, the twisting of prophecy into a weapon of fear, haunted her even as her power thrummed in response. She had embraced her destiny, yet the cost was far from over. Every triumph carried its own shadow, and the more she had claimed, the more isolated she felt. Could anyone truly stand with her without trembling at the force she now embodied? A sudden hush fell over the forest, and in that silence, the question she had avoided until now struck with the weight of inevitability. Would anyone truly choose her, or would they flee at the sight of the fire she carried? The thought was sharp, almost painful, yet she could not deny its truth. She had always been feared, always been set apart. Even now, after proving herself, the world seemed poised to watch and decide, not just her enemies, but those she longed to call allies, even a mate. Her eyes found the Alpha King's again, and for a fleeting moment all the chaos, all the power, and all the danger melted into a fragile stillness. She saw the flicker of doubt in his expression, the battle between instinct and loyalty. She knew then that the story was no longer just about survival or vengeance. It was about trust, about choice, about whether two hearts scarred by the past could truly stand together in the face of the world. And she could not answer for him. That choice lay with him just as hers lay with herself. Would you have chosen me, or turned away? Her voice whispered, more to herself than to him, but the words hung in the frosty air, heavy with longing and challenge. It was not just a question of love or allegiance. It was a challenge to the very nature of fear and devotion. Could they see her, all of her fury and vulnerability, and still step forward? Could anyone truly embrace the fire without being consumed by it? The forest seemed to hold its breath with her. The snow frozen in mid-descent, the ruins trembling as if the earth itself waited for an answer. Even the distant howls of wolves, the echo of ancestral voices, seemed to ask the same question. Will you choose the fire or let it burn alone? Her chest tightened as the weight of possibility pressed down. The villain may have been defeated, but the emotional battlefield was far from settled. Every shadow could hide a new threat, every whisper of wind could carry doubt. She had power now, undeniable and raw, but with it came isolation, a burden that could only be shared if someone truly saw her. Not just the strength but the fear, the pain, the longing, the scars no one else had witnessed. The Alpha King stepped closer, cautious but unflinching. His eyes met hers with an intensity that left her breathless, and for a moment, the world contracted to just the two of them, the fire between them almost visible, almost tangible. The question remained, unspoken yet undeniable. Would he step into that fire or let it rage without him? The heroine felt a tremor of hope, fragile but real. She had claimed her power, faced betrayal, and survived. Yet the emotional landscape, the territory of trust, choice, and belonging, was still uncharted. Could she allow herself to believe that someone could stand beside her, fully without fear? Could the Alpha King, scarred and commanding as he was, embrace the storm she had become? And now, dear listener, it is your turn to step into the moment, to feel the tension as she does. Would you choose her, see her strength without recoiling? Would you stand with her in the fire or shrink back in fear? Every choice, every heartbeat, every step she takes echoes in the silence around you. If this story has lit something in your heart, if the ache of longing and the thrill of danger have touched you, then join us. Subscribe to Anne's Romance Collections, hit the bell, and step closer to the stories that burn with passion, power, and destiny. Here, every tale is more than words. It is a journey through fire and shadow, trust and love, betrayal and triumph. Every story burns in your heart, waiting for the brave to embrace it. The wind stirred again, faint but insistent, whispering of futures unclaimed and choices yet to be made. The silver flame flickered brighter at her side, a pulse of life, a heartbeat of the legacy she carried. And as the ruins settled, the shadows waiting at the edge of vision, and the Alpha King's eyes locked on hers with a promise and a question, the tension lingered, heavy, electric, unresolved, because the story was not over. Not by far. Would you step forward into the fire? Would you choose her side? Or would you watch from the shadows as the world trembles around the girl who refuses to be anyone's sacrifice? The forest exhaled a low, trembling sigh, as though the very trees had been holding their breath through the chaos, and now slowly, reluctantly released it. Shadows stretched long across the snow-dusted ground, curling like fingers, brushing against roots and stones, whispering secrets in a language only the ancient earth remembered. She walked ahead, her steps deliberate but measured, each one sending tiny tremors through frozen soil, and the silver flame along her skin pulsed softly, a heartbeat of warning and defiance. The Alpha King matched her pace, silent but commanding, his presence a tether to sanity, a promise that amidst uncertainty some ground was solid. Even in quiet there was tension, the residue of battles fought, of secrets revealed, of power wielded too early by hearts untested. The air itself seemed to shiver, thick with anticipation and unresolved danger. Every shadow might conceal a predator, every whisper of wind might carry a threat yet unseen. She glanced sideways, her amber eyes meeting his, and for a fleeting heartbeat, the world condensed. Two people scarred by destiny, defiance, and unspoken longing. Her chest rose and fell in rhythm with the pulse of the silver flame, the echo of a power too ancient to ignore. And even as she walked, she felt it. The weight of prophecy, the stirrings of forces older than memory, aware of her rise, sensing her claim and watching with a patience that chilled her as much as it awed. Beneath their feet, the ground trembled subtly at first, almost imperceptibly, then stronger, like the heartbeat of the earth itself sinking with her own. She tightened her grip on the air around her, not knowing if the tremors were warning or welcome, if the world was preparing to bend to her will, or if something darker lurked, testing the limits of her fledgling control. Every step forward was a decision. Forward into shadow, forward into possibility, forward into danger that was as intimate as it was inevitable. From the deepest recesses of the forest, a voice emerged, carried on the wind yet more felt than heard, resonating with the tremor beneath their feet. It was soft, almost a whisper, yet filled with power and intent, a promise of trials to come. She is not the only one. The words twisted in the air, curling around branches and roots, sinking into the snow, finding purchase in every frozen stone. The Alpha King's jaw tightened imperceptibly, his eyes narrowing at the unseen speaker, a flicker of tension crossing the calm he so carefully maintained. She felt it too, a thrill of apprehension running up her spine, her silver flame flaring instinctively, brightening against the gathering dusk like a defiance of the unseen, a challenge to destiny itself. Her breath misted in the cold air, and with each exhale, tiny sparks of light danced across her skin. The forest seemed alive, responding to her presence, each tree, each stone, each shadow acknowledging the power she had seized, trembling at her claim. Yet beneath the pulse of triumph there was unease, a whisper that the battles she had fought were only the beginning, that forces older and more cunning than she could imagine were stirring, waiting for the moment to challenge her again. The Alpha King's hand brushed hers, not an accident but a tether. He didn't speak, and yet the silent connection carried more meaning than words ever could. Together they were a force, untested yet undeniable. But even as she sensed the strength between them, a shard of fear lingered. Could they withstand what was coming? Could they survive the whispers, the shadows, the destinies that had been written long before either of them had drawn breath? Another tremor shook the earth, sharper this time, and with it came a faint, almost imperceptible echo. A howl not of a wolf but of something older, something aware, something that remembered the origins of power and dominance, something that had been waiting for her rise. Her silver flame responded, intensifying, sending arcs of light dancing across the snow, illuminating the forest in a surreal glow. It was both a warning and a declaration. I am here. I claim this. I will not be hidden. The voice returned, layered now, both threatening and prophetic. The true Alpha hasn't risen, yet. The words cut through the stillness, sharp and reverberating, stirring the ancient forces slumbering in the soil and stones. She froze for a heartbeat, letting them sink into her bones, letting the weight of destiny press on her. Her gaze met the Alpha's, and in his eyes she saw reflection, admiration, fear, trust, and a silent promise that he would stand beside her, even as the world trembled. And yet the challenge remained. The prophecy was not complete, the story not finished, and the stakes far higher than either of them could anticipate. Snow drifted around them, light and cold, catching on the edges of her silver flame, amplifying its brilliance. The shadows lurked at the periphery, restless, watching, waiting, aware that the girl who should have been merely a pawn had become a player, a storm in her own right. Every heartbeat, every step forward, every flash of light was a declaration. I will not be a sacrifice. I will not be hidden. I will claim what is mine. The forest exhaled again, and for a fleeting moment, there was silence, pregnant with possibility. She could feel the eyes of unseen watchers, the tremor of ancient power acknowledging her rise, the threads of fate bending subtly, testing the limits of courage, trust, and resolve. The Alpha's presence beside her was steady, grounding, yet the unknown stretched before them like a living thing, immense and unyielding, ready to strike, ready to test, ready to awaken trials beyond imagination. Her silver flame pulsed brighter, brighter than it had ever burned, casting long, flickering shadows across the frost-coated ground. The Alpha's hand found hers again, firm, steadying, a promise unspoken but undeniable. We will face it together. And yet, as their eyes met, they both knew, the story was far from over. This was merely the pause before the next storm, the breath before the fall, the calm that precedes the collision of destiny and power. And then, as if the world itself were listening, the voice whispered one final time, fading into the wind yet leaving its mark in the air and the pulse of the earth. She is not alone. The reckoning is coming, and the true Alpha will rise. The heroine inhaled, chest rising, silver flame flaring in anticipation, the fire in her veins matching the pulse of the earth beneath. She and the Alpha stepped forward, into the gathering twilight, into the unknown, their path illuminated by her power, their hearts bound by trust and defiance. And as the snow swirled and the shadows watched, the story held its breath. The journey was only beginning, and the world would tremble before the girl who refused to bow.